I'm from Canada.
Canada! The weirdest nightmare world that man has ever dreamed.
Welcome everyone, I'm Richard Krause with a list of Canadian horror films that are scarier than the Frankenstein Burger King on Clifton Hill. I'll tell you about a 3D archaeologist, a werewolf movie that reinvents the genre, the first slasher flick, a vocal virus, and much more. Canadians, it seems, not only like being scared at the movies, we also like making horror movies. The first Canuck film widely distributed in the United States was The Mask, a low-budget 3D thriller about an archaeologist who believes he's cursed by a mask that causes him to have weird nightmares and even murder people.
Here to tell you more is the supreme authority on all things weird, initiate of the strange and mysterious, the world's greatest connoisseur and collector of masks, Mr. Jim Moran.
I have seen wonders. I've traveled to the remotest corners of the globe, to dead cities, through savage jungles, to the inner sanctums of esoteric cults, the temples of exotic rituals, to tombs and caverns and palaces. The result? The most comprehensive collection of masks in the world. Some are works of art, some are astounding and horrifying, but nowhere in all my travels have I found a mask so absolutely remarkable as this mask, the miracle movie fright mask, the mask that you will be invited to put on when you see the motion picture called The Mask. This is the mask that will open your eyes to such things as man has never dared imagine. The mask that will make you part of the sensations of the most staggering experience of your life. But be warned, the things that you will see when you put on this mask will surely take you to the very limits of your nerves and to the very boundary line of sanity.
The Mask was a cheapie, knocked out to cash in on the 3D craze started by movies like House of Wax. Although it missed the movement by a few years, it may have inadvertently started a new trend. Since the release of The Mask, which used the tried and true 3D format, but coupled it with experimental electronic music to heighten its spooky effect, Canadian filmmakers have taken traditional horror concepts and made them their own. Take, for instance, Ginger Snaps, the 2000 werewolf story starring Catherine Isabelle about a young woman who morphs into a werewolf. It adroitly plays against the usual horror movie conventions when it comes to portraying teenagers.
Let's get out of here. What was it? Big dog, maybe? Whoa.
Whoa, that's it. Whoa.
Think you see werewolves a lot?
Did I change last night? Howl at the moon.
How do you feel?
Wicked.
The scream queens of Final Destination and urban myth are nowhere to be found in Ginger Snaps. Ginger and her sister Bridget are late bloomers, goth girls who are entering adulthood and experiencing all the traumatic transformations that go along with it. The film's best piece of dark teenage humor is the youth of menstruation as a metaphor for turning into a werewolf. Ginger Snaps takes that metaphor one step further in a wickedly humorous allegory. It's funny, feminist horror. Other examples of distinctive CanCon horror include Black Christmas, a movie shot in Toronto that set the template for most of the slasher films of the 1980s and the 1990s, Cannibal Girls, an early horror comedy, and I could do an entire podcast on David Cronenberg's work alone. So why does Hollywood North have such a unique take on horror? I asked Pontypool screenwriter Tony Burgess, who said, horror fans are always seeking newness and originality, and that's what keeps good horror culture working hard. In Canada, films tend to have much smaller budgets than in the United States, and that means originality has to be found in the story elements as opposed to buying a giant kit of tricks. It's the old cliche about imagination thriving under restriction. restrictions. Canadian horror, and I don't mean when a Zamboni breaks down just before your ice time, but the kind of scary movies we make tend to go against the grain. The squirmy body terror of David Cronenberg and movies like Ginger Snaps and Cannibal Girls bring fresh points of view to established mythologies to breathe new lives into old genres.
Cannibal Girls.
When the morning wakens,
They're young, beautiful, and very, very sexy. They love every man they meet. First to death, then for dinner.
What will you have for dinner, my lovelies? What will you have?
Remember, in order not to offend or horrify those in the audience of a squeamish or prudish disposition, the sound of a bell in the theater will warn you when to close your eyes or turn away so that you may avoid witnessing certain scenes of an especially erotic or gruesome nature.
In 2008, director Bruce McDonald breathed some new life into the withered old lungs of bioterror with his movie Pontypool, the story of a small Ontario town infected by a deadly virus on St. Valentine's Day. It's a god bug that turns the citizens into flesh-eating zombies. Not even Cupid, with a quiver full of arrows, can keep this town safe.
They're pulling 2 people out of a van! Oh my God! They're fighting them!
What you are hearing is an actual radio broadcast. It is the only recording of the event.
Roadblocks preventing people from leaving and entering the area.
Everybody is under quarantine.
We still do not have an official version of these events, and it's very difficult at this moment to get a fix on what has happened.
Oh God! These people are trying to eat their way inside.
They cut into our signal.
To call Pontypool a zombie movie isn't quite accurate. Sure, the movie is about a disease that turns regular people into flesh-eating creeps, but it's more about how they became that way than the eerie after effects of the sickness. Set entirely inside a small radio station in the basement of a church, the story focuses on radio personality Mazzy, played by the great Stephen McHattie, his producer and call screener, who use eyewitness accounts to slowly piece together the horrible story of what's happening outside their doors. We're barely given a glimpse of the zombies, which is good for those with weak stomachs, but may disappoint hardcore George A. Romero fans who expect blood and guts. McDonald has reinvented the wheel by replacing the gore with brain matter, but the kind you think with, not eat. McDonald captures the horror of the story in mostly subtle ways. In his film, a broken window with blood dripping from a shard of glass becomes a chilling symbol of the violence that we never see. Pontypool is a movie set in a radio station about a virus transmitted by speech that plays like a radio show. By and large, the action is described, and for once, the old cliche that what you can't see is more terrifying than what you can actually see rings true. Couple that with a mounting sense of doom, and in Pontypool, you have an edge-of-your-seat thriller.
For your safety, please avoid contact with family members and refrain from the following. All terms of endearment. For greater safety, do not translate this message. Just listen to me.
Canadian horror, and I don't mean Tim Hortons running out of Timbits just before your coffee break, but the kind of scary movies we make tend to turn convention on its head. On the release of Hellions, Bruce McDonald's home invasion survival tale with a demonic twist, I asked him why Canadians like to subvert genre conventions. This is what he said.
I think it's maybe 2 reasons. One is perhaps Canadians are naturally mischievous and like to fuck with people. I think also is that we are we have these great influences of these movies that we love. We grow up loving, and we want to do that too. And often, and this is not this is not an exception, that the script by Pascal Trottier, when I first read it, it read easily like a 40-day shoot, $55 million movie. So I was like, yes, let's do that movie that we know and love, right? We know that movie and we want to do it too. But then when you get the news that, oh, well, you only have 20 days and you have less money, then there is no choice but to subvert and say, okay, we have to now begin with this established premise and established kind of world that we sort of know, but we suddenly we have to make some different kinds of choices. And it's interesting because this was a great example of that, where it was much more of an action picture in a sense, but it was just like, well, you need just time. It's not so much the money, it's just the time. You need time to make action often, because a sequence will work much better in 25 shots than 3 shots, sort of thing. So I think the practical nature of the kind of almost the handmade Canadian cinema, we don't have the big machine, but we do have some smart people and clever people, and we know how to do it. So I think that does create a spin on things that are familiar, just because maybe that's the easy answer. It's just, well, it's just a practical notion.
And it's necessity.
And necessity, but there is that sort of, you're outside the gates of Hollywood, so when the parents are away, the kids will play, That's right. So there's a bit of that, I think, in the Canadian psyche.
Yeah. That was Bruce McDonald, director of Pontypool and Hellions, and you can find both those movies wherever you legally buy and download films. I'm Richard Krause. Thanks for listening to Maple Syrup for Your Eyes. I'll be back soon with more suggestions. In the meantime, be sure to celebrate and support Canadian films.